You are listening to another podcast series by the Sacred Art of Living community, honoring soul-sized questions.
Hello, everyone. My name is Daryl Williams, your host for this podcast series called Soul-Sized Questions. Jack Kennedy has spent his adult life as a spiritual mentor for others. His personal life experiences include areas of grief and addiction that can be special teachers for every person's life. Jack draws from great wisdom traditions that teach us how to trust our own heart when experiencing life's most challenging contradictions. The gift can be to discover the deeper truth that we might have otherwise missed.
So I ask you to listen with heart. We're going to practice that both this morning and this afternoon. First of all, I'd like to bridge from what we finished with or ended on last year. We talked about living in the tension between this world of affairs as it is now and the next world, which in Jesus' mind didn't mean the world after we died. It meant the world as God longed and desired the world to be. And I don't think that any of us are authentically, spiritually alive without finding ourselves right in the middle of that, in that tension between the world as it is and the next world as God desires it. One of the reasons I know I'm living in that tension is I know what goes on in me in the awareness just around 9/11 and since then, and the movement towards war with Iraq, and I can name a lot of other things. There's a lot of pain, there's a lot of anger, there's a lot of hurt, there's a lot of helplessness, and wrapped into that is a deep desire for something. And I know behind all that is desire, and deeper than that is desire. And I, as I said last year and want to say again, I trust that that deepest desiring in me is God dreaming in me. And that my aliveness, my wanting to listen to my own affective life is important, because I get in touch there where God is still dreaming and desiring for me and for the world I find myself standing in awareness of and engaging in and struggling with. So we talked a lot last year about what does it mean to stand in that tension, and for a lot of it, it means choosing to be faithful every day in the face of where we can't be successful. Mother Teresa's thing of, I'm here to be faithful, not to be successful. Of course we want to be successful. Of course we'd like to see the world transformed. In that video we watched last year where Richard Rohr talked, he said, Jesus never promised this utopia that we've kind of usurped, that American dream that religion has usurped, and said there will be this utopia. He says we're just called to strive that there be transformation in us and in the world. I found that both hopeful and discouraging. You mean I might not see any fruit to trying? And then I realized it's not about me seeing the fruit, but trusting that somehow God is faithful in that continuing to long and desire for justice even when God doesn't see it happen in some way. And last year we talked about that's why we come together. And maybe that's why we find it so important to have a sense of community. To stay there intentionally alone is pretty destructive. I know I have to build all kind of shells when I try to do that alone. Even though I buy into some of the first world stuff in my very resistance to community in some ways. I heard a talk somewhere else this summer that helped me understand why spiritual direction is so important for me, and in living with that tension and continually in my own life moving from my world of affairs as it is, especially the darkness that's in that, to hopefully trying to be part of a world or a community or living my life and having the attitude and the behavior that is about the world becoming what God wants it to be, including my world. I'm sure God has a desire for me living in my world of stubbornness as it is and moving towards my world of being open and being somewhat vulnerable as it maybe God desires it to be. And I get to stand right in that attention, and hopefully somebody will sit with me and let me hold that tension without judging it and help me to honor it and pay attention to it and explore where's God right in the midst of that. Because I know God's right there in that tension. God chooses to go there in me. I don't choose to go there in me sometimes. I want to give you some language to see if it's helpful to you or if it connects in terms of what it's like to live in this tension. Have any of you read is it Diane Eck, E-C-K? I have not read Diane Eck, but I listened to somebody who did. And the images that came from Diane Eck through this person really said, oh, it awoke something in me. And what it is about is that there are all kinds of cultural influences. Not all of them are dark. Dark meaning destructive, evil, sinful, de-energizative, disintegrative, all of that stuff, disorienting, separating, isolating, all those words that are not very life-giving. We live in a world of affairs where these are very strong influences, the first three: speed and addiction to speed. You can relate. I have quit my job with the Jesuit Volunteer Corps to have space. I have not been able to read one book this summer. I am addicted to speed. Are you aware of my conscious choice to try to speak more slowly? I speed in my language. I speed. As a 9, I draw on artificial energy from you to get so pumped so I have the energy to connect when I don't need to even do that. Mary's exercise is helping me with that. The second strong influence, dark influence, is consumerism. It's easy to see in its blatant form. You can see it if you come to my home and see all the books I have, not one of which I read this summer. You can see it even in our craving for experience and the intensity of experience. I experience it a lot in direction with myself and with other people, and I'll go more into it this afternoon, where, so I'm joyful. What's next? Let's move right on. What do I do now? I run into that a lot lately, and I want to say something about that this afternoon in some way. And finally is violence. And it's clear to see that in the world. It's clear to see that in myself in terms of my own anger and rage that I've shared with you before. It's very clear to see in what we do to ourselves just by not doing battle with our addiction to speed in our culture. The violence we do. I remembered a lot of things that people said last night because I was moved by it. But Gary, one of the things that you said was that allowing yourself to be loved. That takes, that's a whole antidote to violence. And it does mean making the choices. When we stand in that tension, in that graph I said you, there are other influences that don't come so easily. We have to choose them, and that's my language. The antidote to speed and addiction to speed is stillness. Be still and know that I am God. Now, I'm not telling you how you do this yet. There could be another how-to book on that, probably. I think we get to hold that and maybe find some of our helplessness in that and letting go of always being able to do it, which our culture tells us we should be able to do. I have a really hard time doing this. I keep thinking, well, if I just move to 3, if I'm just redeemed, I'll do it. And I live with the mystery of that tension all the time. The second antidote to consumerism is spaciousness. That can be out here in my world. Where's all the clutter? But also inside, do I create room? And I thought, these 3 choices of trying to live these values. Isn't this what spiritual direction is about in a way? Isn't this what I want to support in another person? And can I even create the way I'm with somebody where there's stillness, where there's spaciousness, where there's room to breathe? I've been watching and observing myself in spiritual direction. I can hardly wait for somebody to quit talking. I've got that response there. And I can tell you about letting go of that and not trying to think of a response to be present, and I'm being aware, I'm engaging in that out of whatever's going on in me. And the third value that I need keep choosing, and it starts to come up in me if I'm still enough and try to find room for that spaciousness, is gentleness, mercy, and compassion. Something that I think is true, it's just my observation, but when I look into the cities, when I look at the violence in the cities, part of poverty is the lack of space. And lack of space creates violence. I get violent when I'm bumping up against so much there's no room just to breathe. And when I create space, there's room for other movements to come up in me. I like Mary's image of standing on the ground. I do know that always standing on concrete somehow cuts me off from, I don't know what it is. It's either the rage flowing out of me or compassion rising up in me. It's blocked. I got to get my feet in the dirt. I got to get it on the ground. So stuff can flow out and stuff can flow in some way. Is spiritual direction about that in some way? What I want you to do in listening with heart to me is pay attention to what's meaningful and heartfelt for you and let the rest of it go. And when I move on here, I'm going to ask you to hear what I'm going to share. And some of it is just remembering what spiritual direction is all about. It's refocusing our energy. When you're listening, I want you to hear it both as, this is what spiritual direction is already about, and I know that. But this is also about how I treat myself in my own spiritual way of being. And as I talk through them with you, can you visit your own experience to see where this is happening, not happening in terms of your spiritual direction relationship and in your relationship with yourself? Out of that will come some heartfelt knowing, I think. I don't want to just read through these. This is probably a restatement of things we visited last year, especially early on. But it's a way of reminding. I want to make comments on some of them. They are in your handout for your perusal and calling yourself back to them. The primary purpose of spiritual direction is to help individuals grow in their personal relationship with their God, with their understanding of who God is, with the divine. It sounds real simple. This afternoon, we're going to talk about some of the difference between psychotherapy and spiritual direction. They're different focuses. They have different intent and different content. And we want to talk about that a little bit in paying attention to what Gerald May has to say about it. But it does mean, and I want to know if you experience, I don't want you to tell me. I'd like you to pay attention if you are experiencing any of these in your life and where. So you're doing some inner reflective while I'm talking. Do you experience recognizing or paying attention to, creating space to pay attention to respond to the divine specific self-communication in life, prayer, and relationships? Where do you, in your experience, say, I think that's where God's communicating with me? And you might say, well, I'm wrong, might be wrong about that, but that's what I name it as. Where do you do that for yourself? Do you experience savoring, tasting, and reliving and enjoying the affective touches of the divine? Are there any affective touches of the divine in your life that you'd say, well, I'm not so sure of that, and I'm not so sure I'm going to say that out loud, but maybe that was that in some way? Savor, taste, and relive is the opposite of consuming. We consume food instead of tasting it sometimes. We wolf it. I do. Savoring is the opposite of consuming. But in our culture, that's wasting time. Often. And I know that I both enjoy it and I start to feel my feelings around that. I need to get on to the next thing. Can you watch Are You Willing to Savor? I was with someone recently who said, what's the next challenge? And I said, could the challenge be to savor? And they just made a face at me. I want to do something. I don't want to just savor it. Well, I don't know. Well, what if you just savor it? Will something come up out of that taste that moves you somewhere? I don't know. I can make something up for you if you want, but it probably ain't going to work. Or if it does, it's just going to mislead you from what's really going on in you anyway. Do you take the time, can I invite you to notice differences that take place because of your affective experiences that you think or say are of God in you? I heard a lot of that last night in my language. I don't know if that was your language. You're saying, I've been influenced by, I notice a difference. This seems to be life-giving, or it seems to be energizing, or it seems to be whatever words you would put on it being something of the light in your life. Explore the divine's seeming absence. The person who listed these things put the word seeming in there, and I'm going, well, sure, you tell me it's seeming. I don't know if it's just seeming. Maybe God really is absent. What is the title of Kushner's book? God, you were in that place I did not know. And I did not know. Yeah. Is there a way of knowing, asking to know? God was in that place. I didn't know it at the time, but I relived it. I remembered it. I revisited it. Spiritual direction, it is okay to let somebody not just report something, but to relive it. In the Christian tradition, do this in remembrance of me. I think that's very much even in the Hebrew tradition. When you remember it, you relive it. So it's not just a past event. The Exodus experience is not just a past event, and just doesn't belittle it. When I relive that in terms of my own experience, I'm called out of my own slavery into the land flowing with milk and honey in some way. Sift through interior movements. Probably next month, we're going to take a look at the role of what it means to be in peer supervision when you are a director, so that you have a place to be with what goes on in you when you're directing somebody else. And you will pay attention to your own interior movements. And the language one person uses is you want to listen for where the dissonance is and the consonance is. And that clicked in for me this morning when I was thinking about Richard talking about the first sound in the universe. And where is there consonance with that sound that's been from the very beginning of time in me and in others? And where is there dissonance? It's a different sound. It's a discord. And we want to pay attention to it. We want to discern, well, where's that sound coming from? We even use that language. It sounds like listen to where the dissonance and the consonance is. Trust. You might want somebody to talk with, to hold it in the light about what does this dissonance mean or this consonant means. But I can tell you my experience is that's jarring. That's dissonance. That's a drop of water on a rock in Ignatius language. I want to find out what that's about. Grow in deeper intimacy with God. A clue for me here always is when I experience distance, lack of intimacy with God, for me, Jack Kennedy, it's because I'm distant and not intimate with myself. God is in that place and I did not know. And hopefully, although this one here, when I reflect on what May had to say, and we're going to be with May this afternoon, almost sounds also like a therapeutic issue. Maybe not a spiritual direction one, although there's room for integration as well as separation. and we get to have that discussion this afternoon, experience greater interior freedom, deeper joy, more grace-filled decisions, a more integrated life, and healthier relationships with self, others, and the world. How about with God also? And those may not be mutually exclusive of each other. And in some ways they are integrated. In Ignatius's language, where do you go to? You find God in all things in some way. So is this remembering for you and reminding you what it is we're about without burdening you in any way, but saying, this is pretty awesome. In the 35 or 40 years, and that, man, I can't believe it's been that long, but it always surprises me when I name the length of time that I have been present with people in this kind of way. It has never lost being awesome. More in the sense of fear and a little bit of terror sometimes, and I don't mean that facetiously. There is a sense of poverty always in sitting with someone, that I'm not adequate. It's not about me anyway, so I don't need to get into that, but I do go there, and I got to work on it. This is about God. And so you may experience some of that when you hear all this stuff and say, well, who am I? Send me. Being called. Let's take a look at some of the contemplative skills. Listen in a non-judgmental and accepting way. Hopefully in your small groups I will invite you, and today I will, at the end of the time you're going to be together, I'm going to ask you to be able to say to each other what was helpful and not helpful. It's not a judgment. It's not casting. It's not an ad hominem, feminine approach. It's this was helpful in my experience, and this wasn't, so we can get some feedback on ways that we are present to people. Are you able to do that? Are you able to listen to yourself, or do you consciously work at co-labor with the Spirit in you to listen to your own inner experience in a non-judgmental and accepting way? Just gently trying to be aware of God's presence. It's like 3 people in the room that somebody mentioned last night that they remembered. That somebody else is here. There's a third ear. And we're going to practice the third ear when I'm finished giving you this input today. Develop a reverent attitude. Oh, wait a minute, I didn't. Developing that reverent attitude, I think, is an important place. It's really, again, letting somebody notice, savor, and relive. And I'm going to invite you in your time together this morning to feel free, if you want, to relive something. That's okay. Or just savor it. It might not be very savory. It may be something that you hold out here and it's distasteful and it's painful. That's okay to hold that out there too. But is there something life-giving in the reliving of it in an atmosphere where it's held with reverence in some way? So there are a lot of other things here that I'm not going to comment on, but be aware of movements toward and away from the divine. And sometimes you can ask somebody, whatever you learn their language is, where does that seem to be leading you? Where does that seem to be going? What are the feelings around going with that movement? Does it seem to be, even though it's painful, somewhat life-giving for you? Or is it really seem like just a dead ender? So that you don't have to be the one deciding where this is leading. Because I'm not we discern together. I don't discern for you. We savor and respond to those movements that are helping growth in union with the divine. And we explore, unpack, and become freer of counter movements. What is a counter movement? One example. I will often ask, and it's something I tuck away. If somebody is talking about feeling guilty about something, and they said, something happened and I feel really guilty, and I hear that guilt feeling, or the guilt that's there, I will often ask, was there any other feeling before the guilt feeling? Was that the initial reaction, immediate response, the spontaneous thing, or did it come in secondly? And I'll stop and think and say, very often, at first I was pleased, or at first I was excited, and then I thought this and that kicked in. And I moved so fast there, And I have a pattern of moving so fast there that I missed that initial spontaneous response. Can we go back and relive that one? Can we savor that a little? Can we draw it out of the dark? Not the darkness meaning evil, but out of the dark that I'm not aware of it, and hold it here for a while. Because that's something you're also experiencing that might be of God, that's zipping right into a patterned, learned behavior that you have about judging yourself, about having that initial feeling in some way.
Jack Kennedy is a special mentor to the Sacred Art of Living Center. If you would like to hear more of his wisdom on this subject, consider participating in one of our online 30-day retreat experiences. You can join others from your own home and at your own pace to benefit from the art of discernment in your everyday life. Go to our website, sacredartofliving.org, to learn more about these virtual retreat programs.